It began on a quiet morning when the sun had just begun to spread soft orange light across the neighborhood. A peaceful hour when no one expected conflict and no one expected a storm. He stepped out of his old pickup truck holding a wooden sign in one hand and a hammer in the other, breathing deeply as if trying to gather every ounce of strength before he did something he should have done months ago. The air was cool, carrying the smell of pine from the line of trees behind his land, and for a moment he felt calm, steady, grounded, until he remembered why he was out here in the first place. He wasn't putting up a sign because he wanted to. He was doing it because he was tired. Tired of waking up to HOA members standing near his backyard. Tired of hearing footsteps on his property at night. Tired of getting letters accusing him of unapproved storage, inconsistent lawn color, fence shadows extending into HOA space, and other nonsense they invented simply to push him around. But today he finally pushed back. He placed the sign at the edge of his dirt line, the exact place his father used to stand with his morning coffee, the exact spot where he learned how to hammer nails when he was only 8 years old. Even before he lifted the hammer, the neighborhood reacted like he was loading a weapon. Curtains slid open. Phone cameras poked out. People stepped quietly onto their porches. Cars slowed down. It was as if the whole place was waiting for him to break a rule, any rule, so they could report him. The sign was simple, nothing threatening, nothing dramatic. Just a message carved in bold letters. Private property. Do not enter. He held it steady and hammered the first nail, each strike echoing across the street like a warning shot. The moment the sign stood fully upright, something changed. The street felt colder. The silence grew louder. A neighbor who was jogging suddenly turned around and jogged away faster. A woman watering her flowers froze midair and rushed inside. And from across the road, the HOA office door swung open with a loud bang. Out stepped HOA President Cynthia Crane, a woman known not for kindness, not for fairness, but for how fast she could turn a minor complaint into a $300 fine. She walked like she owned the sidewalk, heels stabbing the pavement with every step, her eyes sharp, face stone cold, her voice already rising before she even reached the property line. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked. He didn't answer immediately. He simply wiped sweat off his forehead and stepped back to admire the sign that stood tall and firm, like a small act of rebellion he knew would cause a hurricane. Cynthia stepped so close her perfume hit him before her words did, and she jabbed a finger toward the sign like it was illegal. "You can't put that here," she snapped. "You're violating community rules. This is HOA land." He glanced calmly at the ground beneath his boots. The dirt he grew up on, the soil his father plowed, the earth with decades of family memories buried in its roots. "This," he said slowly, "is my land." Cynthia's face twisted into an ugly smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Your land? Don't be ridiculous. The HOA redrew the boundaries months ago. This is common area now." His heart slammed against his ribs. "You don't control my property lines," he said firmly. "The county does." Her smile dropped instantly, turning into a glare filled with venom. That's when she snapped. Cynthia pulled out her phone like a weapon, dialed emergency services, and began shouting loud enough for the entire street to hear. "Police? Yes, we have a man trespassing. He's threatening the neighborhood. He's refusing to leave HOA property." People gasped. Some stepped farther back. A few whispered as if he had suddenly turned dangerous. He stood there, stunned at how fast she twisted the truth, how fast she turned him into the villain. The land he was standing on wasn't HOA land. It wasn't common area. It wasn't abandoned. It was his. His name was on the deed. His father had written it into his will. But Cynthia didn't care about the truth. She cared about control. She cared about winning. And in her mind, if she could convince the police he was trespassing on property she claimed belonged to the HOA, she could push him out forever. She could force him to surrender his land. She could build whatever she wanted on it. She could erase him. The sound of police sirens approached in the distance, growing louder with every second. Neighbors gathered behind fences, peeking over the tops like children, watching a dangerous scene unfold. By the time the police cruiser rolled to a stop, lights flashing across the freshly cut lawns. The entire neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. The officers stepped out with hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning the scene. Cynthia rushed toward them as if she were the victim in a tragic movie, pointing dramatically at him. "That's him. That's the trespasser. He threatened me." He stared in disbelief. "I didn't threaten anyone," he said firmly. "I was putting up a sign on my land." Cynthia scoffed so loudly the officers turned to look at her. "It's not his land," she insisted. "He keeps saying it is, but the HOA owns this section now. He's refusing to leave community property." The officers turned to him. "Sir, we need to ask you to step away from the sign." A hard knot formed in his chest. "This is my property," he repeated quietly but firmly. The officers exchanged uncertain looks. One said, "She's claiming it's HOA property. We need to sort this out." Cynthia smirked like a queen who had already won the battle. "He's been causing problems for months," she added. "We've had complaints. He's aggressive, unstable, a danger." His hands curled into fists, not out of anger, but out of pain. Pain that someone could lie so easily. Pain that his land could be taken with one phone call. Pain that the officers were hesitating to believe him simply because her voice was louder. The taller officer stepped closer to him. "Sir, for now, we're instructing you to move off this section until we verify ownership." His throat tightened, his stomach churned, but he stepped back because he refused to be arrested on his own soil. As he moved away from the sign, Cynthia smiled triumphantly. A cruel smile. A smile that said, "I control this place. I control you." But that's when he saw it. Tiny detail. A small but powerful truth. The original property marker. Buried slightly old, covered in dry soil. Sitting exactly where his father had placed it decades ago. And Cynthia knew he saw it. She stepped in front of it quickly, blocking the view with her foot. The act was small, but the impact was huge. She didn't want the officers to see the real boundary. She didn't want anyone to discover the truth. She was hiding something. The officers didn't notice her foot covering the marker. But he did. And in that moment, beneath the flashing lights and the cold stares of neighbors, he understood. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan. The HOA wasn't confused. They weren't mistaken. They were trying to erase his land, inch by inch, boundary by boundary, lie by lie. When the officers told him they would return after verifying county records, Cynthia smiled as if their decision was a victory sealed forever. The neighbors whispered quietly as the police left. Some showed sympathy in their eyes. Others stepped back, afraid of HOA retaliation. And he stood alone on the sidewalk, staring at his land. The land that had been his since the day he was born. Feeling a deep, cold realization settle like a stone in his chest. Something dark was happening. Something calculated. Something meant to push him out of the neighborhood. As he looked at the wooden sign he built with his own hands, lying crooked in the dirt where he had left it, he whispered to himself, "They're trying to take everything." And in that moment, with fear and anger twisting inside him, he made a silent promise. He barely slept that night. The flashing red and blue lights kept replaying in his mind. The officers' confused faces, Cynthia's cruel smile, the neighbors whispering like he was a criminal instead of a man simply standing on land he had lived on his entire life. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the old wooden deed his father kept inside a tin box, the same deed his father once placed in his hands and said, "This land is your backbone. Protect it no matter what." Those words echoed now, louder than ever, turning his exhaustion into something stronger, something sharper. When morning came, he stepped outside and walked the property line with slow, heavy steps, the cold air brushing against his face as he bent down to examine the ground where Cynthia had planted her foot the day before. And there it was, the old metal boundary marker, half buried under soil, rusted but still solid, still standing exactly where it belonged. He knelt and ran his fingers across it, feeling the rough surface, remembering the day he was a little boy holding his father's hand as they checked every marker together. His father had said, These lines tell our history. If anyone moves them, they're trying to steal who we are. And now someone was doing exactly that. He stood slowly and looked around. Every house felt different today. Every porch, every window, every neighbor who peeked through blinds. The street didn't feel like a community anymore. Felt like a battlefield. He walked to the sign he had built and picked it up gently, brushing off the dirt like it was something fragile, something precious. As he held it, he noticed his neighbor Mrs. Clark, an elderly woman who rarely spoke because she feared HOA punishments, standing on her porch holding her dog. She looked nervous, torn between speaking and staying silent. But after a moment, she walked closer. Her voice trembled. "I saw what happened yesterday." He looked at her gently. "I didn't expect anyone to speak up." She swallowed hard. "My husband, he used to say the HOA was getting too powerful, that they were changing rules without asking us." She hesitated. Then when he questioned them, "They fined us for our mailbox being too faded. We repainted it twice." Her eyes filled with tears as if she had been holding this in for months. "Cynthia scared us. She still scares us. None of us know how to fight her." He felt a deep ache in his chest. Not anger this time, but sadness. Sadness because fear had taken over the neighborhood long before he ever put up his sign. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You shouldn't have to live like that." She wiped her tears quickly and looked around before leaning closer. "I overheard her yesterday. She said once the police filed their report, she would move the boundaries officially. She said you'd lose your land before you even stepped foot in court." His breath caught. She continued, voice trembling, and she laughed, like it was already done. Mrs. Clark glanced around, terrified someone might be watching. "Please, be careful." Then she hurried back to her porch, leaving him alone with the crushing realization that Cynthia wasn't acting out of misunderstanding. She was planning this. She was engineering it. She was manipulating the law, the neighbors, the police, everything. He walked back towards his shed, the old wooden door creaking open as he stepped inside to pull out an old notebook filled with property notes his father kept. He sat on a stool and flipped through it, page after page of measurements, sketches, and old photos of the land when his family first moved there. The more he read, the clearer it became. Every inch of this land was his father's blood, sweat, and life. Losing it wasn't just losing soil. It was losing history, losing identity, losing everything. He closed the notebook with shaking hands and let out a long breath that felt like smoke rising from a burning fire inside him. "They're not taking this," he whispered to himself. "Not while I'm alive." Just then, a car pulled up outside. He peeked through the shed window and saw 2 HOA board members stepping out, the same ones who usually followed Cynthia like scared little shadows. They walked toward his property line quickly, carrying clipboards. He stepped outside and approached them calmly. "What do you want?" he asked. The taller one avoided his eyes. "We're here to perform a boundary review." The other said, "Cynthia ordered it." A slow burn lit behind his ribs. "On whose authority?" he asked quietly. They hesitated. "HOA authority." He crossed his arms. "HOA doesn't own my land." They glanced at each other nervously. Then the shorter member muttered, "We're just doing what she told us to." The tall one placed a neon marker flag several feet inside his property. "This is where the line is." He laughed. An angry, heartbroken sound. "That's not where the line is. That's 10 feet into my land." They shrugged helplessly. "We have to follow orders." He stepped forward and pulled the neon flag out of the ground with one swift, sharp motion. "Not on my land, you don't." The HOA members froze, fear clear in their eyes. "Cynthia won't like that," the tall one whispered. "I'm not here to make her happy," he said. "I'm here to defend what's mine." They backed away slowly like men walking away from a fire growing too fast to control. He placed the marker flag on his truck, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel. The world felt heavy, but something inside him had already shifted. He wasn't the scared, confused man from yesterday. He was the son of a man who spent his life building this land, protecting it, loving it, and he was going to honor that. He drove straight to the county office, hands gripping the wheel tightly, every bump in the road echoing in his chest like a heartbeat made of determination. The lobby smelled like old paper and cold air, and the woman at the counter looked up with tired eyes. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I need every file related to my property," he said. "Every survey, every map, every record." She blinked slowly, surprised. "That's a lot of paperwork." He nodded. "I have time." As she pulled files, he noticed something strange. 2 files for the same parcel number. One old, one new, one with his father's name, one marked as HOA managed common area. Something cold crawled up his spine. This wasn't a mistake. This was fraud. Someone had duplicated the parcel and altered the title. There was only one person with motive and nerve enough to do that: Cynthia Crane. He took everything, photocopied every page, every stamp, every signature. When he placed all the papers into his folder, he felt a sudden clarity. A fire. Purpose. Cynthia thought the police could scare him. She thought boundaries drawn with lies could break him. She thought the neighborhood's silence could weaken him. But she forgot one thing: land teaches you how to stand your ground. And he had learned that lesson his whole life. He stepped out of the county building with the sun shining on his face and a folder full of truth in his hands. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt stronger than the fear, stronger than the lies, stronger than the HOA that tried to erase him. They had pushed him too far. And now he was pushing back. The battle had begun. He drove home with the thick folder sitting in the passenger seat like a silent weapon. The kind that didn't need bullets to destroy someone. It only needed truth. Each red light felt longer, each turn heavier, because the more he thought about those duplicate parcel files, the more everything began to make sense. All the surprise inspections, all the fines, all the claims of community area, all the attempts to push him into selling. None of it had been random. Cynthia had been preparing this for months, maybe longer. She hadn't been reacting to his sign. She had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and the moment he pushed back, she tried to crush him. When he pulled into his driveway, he saw the fresh footprint marks in the dirt near the boundary, signs that someone had come again while he was gone. He clenched his jaw, grabbed the folder, and walked straight to the boundary marker he found under the soil. He knelt, brushing away the dirt carefully until the old metal marker fully appeared, its rusted edges catching the afternoon sun like a small beacon of truth. He took a picture, then another, then a close-up of the date engraved into the metal. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Markers don't move unless hands with bad intentions move them, and Cynthia definitely had bad intentions. Just then he heard footsteps behind him, the crunch of gravel slowly approaching. He turned sharply to see his next-door neighbor, Tom, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, walking toward him with a nervous look. Tom wasn't the type to get involved in anything. But today, he looked like a man carrying something he couldn't hold alone anymore. "I need to show you something," Tom whispered. He glanced around like the trees were listening, then motioned for him to follow. They walked behind Tom's house, where Tom pointed at a black security camera tucked under his roof. "It picked up something 2 nights ago," Tom said, voice trembling. "Something I think you should see." They went inside Tom's garage where a screen displayed the recording. Tom pressed play. The video showed a dark night, the street quiet, the neighborhood asleep, until 3 HOA members appeared near the property line. They weren't walking casually. They were carrying tape measures, stakes, and flashlights. The tallest one whispered, "Cynthia wants it shifted another 4 feet tonight. No one's watching." Another one grumbled, "If the owner sees this, we're dead." The third said, "Relax. He's alone. Who's going to believe him?" And right there, on camera, they pulled the old boundary marker out of the dirt and hammered a new fake one deeper into his land. His heart dropped. His hands shook. His chest tightened like someone had tied an iron rope around him. He stared at the screen for a long moment, unable to speak. Tom swallowed and whispered, "I didn't know what to do. At first I thought maybe they had legal permission. But then, after yesterday, I realized they're trying to steal your property. All of it." He felt heat rising behind his eyes. Not from sadness, Not from fear, but from pure anger, the kind that comes when you see people violate your family's legacy. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed slowly until he could speak again. "Thank you, Tom," he said quietly. Tom nodded, relief on his face. "I'll testify if you need me. I'm not scared of them anymore." That sentence hit him harder than the video. Someone had finally chosen courage over fear, because of him. He copied the footage onto a USB, shook Tom's hand firmly, and walked back to his house with purpose in every step. But the moment he reached his porch, he saw something that made his stomach drop again. A bright yellow envelope taped to his door. Another HOA violation notice. He ripped it off and opened it. The accusation this time was outrageous. Unauthorized disturbance of HOA soil, tampering with community markers, threatening HOA representatives. He laughed darkly. They were escalating. They were trying to paint him as the criminal. They wanted to overwhelm him with lies before he reached court. He crumpled the letter in his fist and threw it inside. As he sat on his porch steps, he stared at his land stretching out before him. The trees, the dirt path, the broken fence, the memories carved into the soil. He remembered running barefoot here as a kid, helping his father plant new trees, learning how to measure land, learning how property lines worked. Everything he knew, everything he cared about, everything that gave him strength. It all came from this land. Losing it wasn't an option. Giving in wasn't an option. And the HOA's lies were becoming thicker than the summer heat around him. He picked up the old notebook again, flipping through the faded pages as if searching for guidance from the man who trained him to be strong. Then, slowly, something inside him settled. A feeling that wasn't anger or fear. It was resolve. Deep, fierce, unshakable resolve. He walked to the back of his house and stood in the center of his land, feeling the soil under his shoes, the evening breeze brushing against his shoulders, the sunset glowing across the trees. For the first time since the nightmare started, he truly understood what this fight meant. It wasn't about a sign. It wasn't about a boundary. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about protecting his father's legacy. It was about honoring the man who built this land. It was about refusing to let anyone erase decades of family history. He looked toward Cynthia's house across the street, the curtains slightly open, her silhouette watching him like a hawk preparing to strike again. But this time, when he stared back, she stepped away. Maybe for the first time, she sensed something had shifted. He wasn't scared anymore. He wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't alone anymore. He had proof. He had allies. And he had fire in his voice now. He whispered to the empty yard. "You're not taking anything from me." The wind carried the words across the grass, as if the land itself answered back. This wasn't just a conflict. This was war. A quiet war. A dirty war. A war fought with lies, markers, boundaries, and paperwork. But he wasn't going to lose. Not when the truth stood so firmly beside him. And as the sun dropped behind the horizon, leaving the land in a peaceful shadow, he made a promise he intended to keep. Cynthia Crane picked the wrong man, and this land would never belong to her. The next morning felt different, not because the sun rose any brighter, but because the air carried a tension so thick it felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. He woke up early, sat on the edge of his bed, and listened to the silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful but felt like the calm before a storm. When he stepped outside, coffee in hand, he immediately noticed a group of HOA board members gathered near his property line. Their clipboards tucked under their arms like shields, their faces serious and tight. Cynthia wasn't there this time, which made the scene even more suspicious, because she never missed an opportunity to show off her authority. The moment they saw him walking toward them, they straightened their posture like guilty children trying to pretend they didn't break anything. He placed his coffee cup on the fence post and walked all the way up to them, his calmness making them more uncomfortable than anger ever could. "Morning," he said quietly. None of them responded. Instead, the tall man from before cleared his throat awkwardly. "We're, conducting an HOA boundary update." He raised an eyebrow. Again, the man fumbled with his papers. "Yes, well," Cynthia said, He cut him off, voice low and sharp. Cynthia says a lot of things. The board members exchanged nervous glances, and for the first time he saw it clearly. They weren't standing here willingly. They were scared of Cynthia, terrified, even. They were following orders because they feared what she would do to them if they didn't. But fear wasn't an excuse for helping her steal land. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you even know what she's doing? Silence. No one moved. No one blinked. He continued. She's forging boundaries. She's moving markers at night. She's filing fake reports. And she's dragging all of you down with her. The woman in the middle swallowed hard. We didn't know it was fake, she whispered, but her voice shook with guilt. He looked directly into her eyes. Now you do. That moment hung between them like a broken truth falling to the ground. Just then, a familiar car rolled down the street, Cynthia's black SUV, shining like a polished weapon. It slowed as it approached the property, and she stepped out wearing her usual armor. Sunglasses, expensive clothes, and a fake smile stretched tight across her face. Good morning, she said cheerfully, her voice dripping with arrogance. I see you've met my team. He folded his arms. You mean your accomplices? Her smile twitched, but she kept it steady. We're simply here to maintain community standards. You, however, are causing unnecessary problems. He stepped forward slowly, inch by inch, until they were face to face again. I have your HOA members on video moving boundary markers at night, he said quietly. Cynthia didn't flinch, but he saw her fingers tighten around her sunglasses. I have county documents proving you duplicated my parcel, he added. Her jaw clenched. I also have witnesses who overheard your conversations. Her smile cracked. He could see the panic struggling behind her eyes, a panic she tried desperately to hide. You don't know what you're talking about, she snapped. This land needs to be unified for the good of the community. He laughed softly. This isn't about community. This is about power. Cynthia's facade broke for a split second, long enough for fear to peek through. Look around, she hissed. No one will stand with you. They're all on my side. At that exact moment, Mrs. Clark stepped out of her house holding a small dog and called out, Actually, we're not. Cynthia spun around, shocked. Mrs. Clark walked closer, her voice trembling but brave. You threatened us. You fined us unfairly. You tried to steal his land. We won't stay quiet anymore. A couple from 2 houses down stepped out next, then another neighbor and another, forming a small but growing group behind him. They all looked afraid, but they stood anyway. Cynthia's face reddened with rage. You ungrateful people, she shouted. Do you have any idea what I've done for this neighborhood? The tall HOA man finally found his courage. You've done enough, he said firmly. We're done helping you. Cynthia looked betrayed, furious, shaking with disbelief. You're all making a mistake, she snapped. He's lying. He's manipulating you. He stepped forward and placed the USB drive, containing the camera footage, in her hand. She stared at it, confused. This is your voice, he said. You ordered the markers moved. You said you'd take my land before I came back from the courthouse. Cynthia's hand trembled. That's private property footage. It's not admissible. He looked her straight in the eye. It doesn't matter what's admissible. What matters is everyone saw who you really are. She dropped the USB like it burned her fingers and backed away. For the first time, she didn't look like the HOA president. She looked like a woman losing everything she tried to steal. But the moment the tension peaked, something unexpected happened. A police cruiser turned the corner and stopped right at his driveway. Cynthia straightened her back again, confidence flooding back into her expression like a bad habit she couldn't let go of. Officer, she said quickly, striding toward him. I'm glad you're here. The trespasser is... The officer raised a hand sharply. Mrs. Crane, we're not here for him. Cynthia blinked fast, thrown off balance. What do you mean? The officer stepped aside. Behind him stood another officer holding a clipboard and a printed report. We received a complaint about falsified information filed by the HOA, the officer said. Your paperwork doesn't match county records. Cynthia's face drained of color. What? That's impossible. The officer continued, we also received video evidence of your board members moving boundary markers illegally. Cynthia shook her head rapidly, backing away. No, they're lying. This is a setup. The officer's tone hardened. We'll investigate. But for now, we're issuing a temporary halt on all HOA actions against this address until the dispute is resolved. The entire neighborhood gasped. Cynthia's power crumbled right there on the pavement. She looked around desperately, hoping anyone, would defend her. No one did. Even her board members looked away, ashamed. She turned toward him with rage and panic mixing in her eyes like fire and water colliding violently. This isn't over, she spat. He stepped forward, voice steady and soft. For you, it is. She flinched like his words physically hit her. As the officers drove away, the neighbors returned to their homes quietly, whispering to each other, the tension slowly dissolving into a strange new calm. He stood alone at the edge of his land, watching Cynthia's SUV speed away like a wounded animal escaping into the woods. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the land in warm shades of gold. The same land his father walked, the same land he almost lost. For the first time in weeks, he felt the soil under his boots steady him, grounding him, reminding him that some things, like truth, like legacy, like land, can't be taken by lies. Not when a man decides to fight back. And as he looked at the wooden sign still standing strong, he whispered to himself, this is only the beginning. The day of the hearing arrived like a slow-building storm, thick with tension and heavy with the weight of every lie Cynthia had created. And as he parked outside the courthouse, his hands gripping the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary, he felt the echo of every step that had led him here. The sign, the police sirens, the fake markers, the neighbors' fear, the late-night whispers of HOA members moving boundaries in the dark, the old metal marker buried under soil like a secret, begging to be found. He stepped out of the truck and walked up the stone steps with the folder tucked under his arm. The folder filled with truth, county records, old deeds, property maps, photographs, timestamps, and Tom's security footage capturing the betrayal in crystal clarity. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Neighbors sat in the back row, some with hopeful eyes, others anxious, all waiting to see whether the land thief who had ruled their lives with an iron fist would finally be exposed. Cynthia sat at the plaintiff's table in a dark blazer, her posture stiff and her voice sharp as she whispered to her lawyer. She still tried to look powerful, but her hands betrayed her. Her fingers twitched, gripping her pen so tightly it looked like it might snap. The judge entered, a calm woman with stern eyes, the kind who could read lies as easily as a book, and everyone stood before taking their seats again. Cynthia's lawyer began with rehearsed confidence, claiming the HOA had rightfully reclaimed and used community land, that the defendant trespassed multiple times, that he refused to follow HOA rules and interfered with community integrity. Cynthia nodded dramatically at every sentence, playing victim like a seasoned actress. But the judge's expression stayed flat, unmoved, unimpressed. When it was his turn, he walked to the stand without rushing, without shaking, without fear, because the truth was so heavy in his hands it almost anchored him. He placed the folder down, opened it carefully, and pulled out the original deed, the one with his father's signature, the one older than the HOA itself. This land has been in my family for decades, he said, voice steady. My father protected it, and now I'm protecting it. The judge took the document, read it slowly, and her eyebrows rose slightly. That small reaction gave the whole room hope. Then he placed the archived county maps, one after another, each one showing the same boundary line, the same parcel number, the same ownership. He explained how Cynthia filed a duplicate parcel. The courtroom stiffened. He explained how HOA members moved the old marker in the dead of night. People in the room gasped softly. Cynthia shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tightening, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. And then he pulled out the USB drive. This, he said quietly, is what they didn't expect me to have. Tom nodded from the back row, giving him silent support. The judge allowed him to play it. The screen lit up, showing the grainy nighttime footage. 3 HOA members sneaking around with flashlights, whispering Cynthia's name, hammering new markers into the soil, laughing nervously as they destroyed the original line. "Cynthia wants it moved 4 feet tonight," one of them said. "He'll never notice. Unless he wakes up," another whispered. "Relax," the third said. "He's alone. No one will believe him anyway." Cynthia's face drained of color as the judge stared at the screen with a tightening jaw. The entire courtroom fell into a thick, shocked silence. When the recording ended, the judge leaned forward and asked Cynthia, "Mrs. Crane, would you like to explain this footage?" Cynthia stood, but her voice cracked before words even left her mouth. This is taken out of context," she stammered. "They were confused. They misunderstood my instructions." The judge didn't blink. "Did you or did you not order them to move the boundary markers?" Cynthia froze, panic flickering across her face. She looked at her lawyer, but he had already lowered his head, defeated. I, she stuttered, voice trembling. "I was trying to protect the community." The judge slammed her hand on the bench sharply, making Cynthia jump. "By forging land boundaries? By lying to police? By harassing a property owner?" Cynthia's legs buckled, and she dropped back into her seat, shaking uncontrollably, her entire facade collapsing like a brittle mask. The judge turned to him next, her voice softening. "You have presented overwhelming evidence. The boundary belongs to you. The land belongs to you. The actions of the HOA were unlawful." Then came the final blow, the judgment that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. The HOA is ordered to cease all claims against the defendant. The land is officially confirmed as his private property. The HOA president, Cynthia Crane, is removed from her position effective immediately and will face separate charges for falsification of records and misuse of authority. Cynthia gasped, clutching the edge of the table like she was drowning. No, this can't be happening," she whispered, tears forming as realization hit her. "I built the community. I controlled." She stopped, because she finally understood she had lost everything. Neighbors whispered, some shaking their heads, others wiping tears, relieved to see justice after years of fear. Tom clapped softly from the back, and a few others joined him. Cynthia's lawyer gathered her papers quietly, refusing to look at her. The judge stood, ending the session, her robe sweeping behind her like a symbol of finality. As he walked out of the courtroom, folder still in hand, sunlight hit his face, warm and gentle, like a quiet blessing after a long storm. The neighbors who once hid behind curtains now approached him with gratitude, shaking his hand, thanking him for standing up not only for himself but for all of them. He looked across the parking lot and saw Cynthia sitting alone on a bench, shoulders shaking, her empire reduced to dust. He didn't feel victory over her. He felt relief for himself, for his father's legacy, for the land that would never be stolen again. He got into his truck, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered, "It's not over, but it's finally turning." And as he drove away, he knew one thing with full certainty. The battle had moved from fear to justice, and he was finally winning. He drove home from the courthouse with the judgment echoing in his ears like a soft but powerful drumbeat. Each word the judge spoke replaying inside him. The land is yours. The HOA acted illegally. Cynthia is removed from her position. The sunlight through his windshield felt warmer than it ever had, as if the world itself was finally breathing again after weeks of suffocating under lies. And yet inside him there was a strange mixture of relief and heaviness because even though he won, even though truth stood firmly with him, the damage Cynthia caused still lingered in every corner of his mind. When he turned onto his street, he expected the same tightness in his chest, the same dread that tightened his throat every time he saw HOA members standing on his property. But today something was different. The whole neighborhood was quiet. Not the fearful kind of quiet, not the tense silence that hid whispers and suspicion, but a calm, meaningful quiet that felt like a neighborhood waking up after a long nightmare. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw neighbors peek from their porches, but not with fear or judgment this time. This time their eyes held respect, gratitude, and a hint of courage that hadn't existed before. Mrs. Clark waved with a small smile, her little dog sitting calmly at her feet. Tom stood across the street with his arms crossed, nodding at him with pride. Even people who never looked at him before, people who used to hide behind Cynthia's rules, now watched him with relief like he had done something for all of them, not just himself. He stepped out of the truck slowly, the gravel crunching under his boots, and looked at the wooden sign still standing near the boundary. Private property, do not enter. It had caused a storm, a war, a fight he never asked for. But now it stood like a symbol of victory, quiet, firm, unbroken. He walked to it and touched the edge lightly, remembering how uncertain he felt the morning he put it up. Now he felt stronger, grounded, and strangely emotional, as if the land itself was finally exhaling after being threatened for too long. As he stood there, a soft voice came from behind him. "You did it." He turned to see Tom walking up the driveway, hands in his pockets, relief painted across his tired face. "You stood up to her," Tom continued. "We should have done it years ago." He nodded, not with pride, but with quiet understanding. "People don't fight when they're scared," he said softly. "She controlled that fear. That's why she lasted so long." Tom sighed and looked toward Cynthia's house. "Well, she's gone now. Gone." The word echoed strangely in his ears. He looked across the street where her SUV usually sat like a black reminder of her authority. But today the driveway was empty, the blinds shut tight, the house silent. She hadn't come home after court. Maybe she was hiding. Maybe she left town altogether. Maybe she couldn't face the neighborhood she once ruled. Whatever the reason, the emptiness of her house felt symbolic, power drained, throne abandoned, lies exposed. But even as he stood there absorbing the peace settling over the street, something inside him resisted relaxing completely. A storm like Cynthia doesn't disappear quietly, and he knew the damage she did would ripple for a while. Later that afternoon, he walked the full perimeter of his land, making sure every marker was intact. He checked the soil where the fake markers had been hammered. He photographed everything, documenting it carefully, not out of paranoia but out of the habit Cynthia had forced him into, protecting himself with truth. The breeze brushed through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and earth, and for a moment he felt like a boy again, walking the land with his father, listening to him say, "Land remembers who loves it and who tries to take it." He whispered, "I'm still here, Dad." And something in his heart loosened. As the sun dropped lower, turning the sky into a soft blend of gold and pink, he heard footsteps approaching again, this time softer, nervous. It was one of the HOA board members, the woman who used to deliver fines with a clipboard shaking slightly in her hands. She stopped a few feet from him, clutching an envelope. I came to apologize," she said quietly. He didn't say anything. He just listened. "Cynthia, she made us believe you were dangerous. She told us you didn't care about the community. She said you wanted to destroy the HOA." She swallowed hard. "We were wrong." He nodded slowly. "Fear makes people follow the wrong leaders." She looked down, ashamed. "We resigned today. All of us. We emptied the HOA office. We locked the doors. We don't want any part of what she built." Her voice cracked. "We're sorry." She handed him the envelope. "These are all the fines she gave you. They're canceled." He accepted it quietly. She walked away with tears in her eyes, years of guilt finally breaking free. He went back into his house, sat at the table, and opened the envelope. Dozens of fine notices spilled out. Unapproved lawn length, fence height violations, mailbox color inconsistencies, unnecessary noise reports, false complaints. Each one a tool Cynthia used to control him, punish him, push him toward giving up. He gathered them into a stack, walked outside, and threw them into the metal burn barrel behind the shed. One flick of a match, one small flame, and all her lies curled into ash under the fading sky. As the flames rose, he felt something even stronger, closure. But the moment felt even heavier when he returned to the porch and found his father's old leather notebook sitting where he left it earlier. He opened it and ran his fingers along the pages filled with land sketches, crop notes, memories written in shaky handwriting. He whispered, "I kept it safe." And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he let himself cry, not from sadness, not from fear, but from the overwhelming release of carrying a burden too heavy for too long. He wiped his face, took a deep breath, and stood tall again because the fight had ended, but his responsibility hadn't. The land was safe. The neighborhood was safe. Cynthia's grip was broken, but he wasn't finished rebuilding yet. As night fell completely, the street lights flickered on, casting a soft glow across the quiet road. He stepped off his porch and looked out over his land, strong, grounded, and he said one final promise into the night, not to Cynthia, not to the neighbors, but to the soil beneath him. "No one will ever steal you again." The next morning rose quiet and silver, the kind of morning where sunlight gently stretches across the land like a soft hand reminding everything to breathe again. And for the first time in weeks he stepped outside without checking over his shoulder, without wondering who was watching, without fearing the sound of HOA footsteps crushing the soil that carried his father's memory. He walked slowly across his yard, touching the old wooden fence as he passed, feeling every nail, every scratch, every piece of history carved into it. And as he reached the boundary line he paused, letting the cool breeze wash over him while he stared at the land that had survived the longest fight of his life. The sign stood tall, "Private property, do not enter." No longer a threat, no longer a beginning of war, but a symbol of everything he endured, everything he protected, everything he refused to let the world take from him. He stood there until he heard soft footsteps behind him, and when he turned, he saw neighbors slowly walking toward his property one by one. Mrs. Clark holding her dog, Tom with his hands in his pockets, the couple from across the street holding a small potted plant, even the board members who had resigned days earlier, all of them gathering not in fear, not in secret, but openly, peacefully, respectfully. They formed a quiet half-circle around him, their faces filled with softness and gratitude, and for a moment he felt overwhelmed because these were the same people who once hid behind curtains, who once whispered about him, who once did nothing when Cynthia attacked him. Yet here they stood now, free because he fought. Mrs. Clark stepped forward first, her thin voice trembling. "We've lived in fear for years," she said. "Yesterday was the first day I slept peacefully in a long time." Tom nodded. "You didn't just save your land," he added. "You broke the chains she wrapped around all of us." The couple handed him the plant, explaining softly, "A peace lily for a new beginning." He accepted it with a quiet nod, feeling a warm sting behind his eyes because he didn't expect this. He didn't expect gratitude or respect or anything from people who once stayed silent. But silence wasn't cowardice. It was fear, and fear was finally gone. One of the former HOA board members stepped forward, the woman who once delivered fines with shaking hands. She held out a small box. "We found this in the HOA office," she said shakily. When he opened it, he saw dozens of documents Cynthia stored. Unused violations, letters she never sent, maps she marked with red circles, plans for future community expansion that were really just plans to steal more land. But under all of that, buried at the bottom, was something unexpected. A photo of his father standing next to a fence post years before the HOA even existed, smiling proudly with a hammer in his hand. The board member whispered, "She kept this because it scared her. Your father's claim was real, stronger than anything she wrote." The photo hit him like a wave. He held it with both hands, fingers trembling, throat tightening, because it wasn't just a picture. It was a reminder that he didn't fight this battle alone. His father had been with him the entire time, in the soil, in the markers, in the land, in every step he took to defend their legacy. The neighbors slowly drifted back to their homes, leaving him standing in the middle of the yard holding the peace lily and the photo. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of relief, full of victory, full of healing. He walked toward the center of his land, the place where his father once taught him how to measure property lines, how to protect what belonged to them. He knelt there gently, removed a small patch of soil, and planted the peace lily in the ground. "Grow strong," he whispered. "This land is yours too now." The wind rustled through the trees as if answering him. Before he stood up, he heard a car door slam across the street. He turned, and there she was, Cynthia Crane, standing on the sidewalk in clothes far less polished than before, her sunglasses gone. Her confidence shattered so completely, she looked like a ghost of the woman she pretended to be. She didn't step onto his property. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She just stood there, staring at him with tired, defeated eyes. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice almost too soft for the breeze to carry. "I'm sorry." The words were fragile, trembling, struggling to stay together. She swallowed hard. "I lost myself in control. I thought power meant ownership. I thought if I kept winning, I'd never lose anything else." She blinked fast. "But I lost everything anyway." He didn't move closer. He didn't lash out. He didn't offer forgiveness. Some wounds weren't healed by apologies. Some wounds weren't meant to be reopened. But he also didn't hate her. Hate was a chain too heavy to carry after a war like this. So he simply nodded and said quietly, "Go build a better life somewhere else." She lowered her head, tears falling silently, and walked back to her car without another word. As her engine faded down the street, the last shadow of her presence faded with it. He stood alone again, the breeze soft, the sky wide, the land calm. He looked at the peace lily growing where his father once stood, the soil rich beneath it, the sunlight warm on its leaves. His land was safe now. His father's legacy was safe. The boundaries were restored. The truth had won. And as he walked back to his house, he felt something he hadn't felt since all of this began. Freedom. Not just freedom from Cynthia. Not just freedom from false rules. But freedom from fear. He stepped onto his porch, took one last look at his land stretching proudly before him, and whispered with a quiet smile, "We made it, Dad." And the land, peaceful and strong beneath the evening sky, felt like it whispered back,